start governing again and doing more harsh methods and roll back the state, and that is the task.
I'm wondering, Danny Finkelstein, whether you think there are parallels with 1945. So after the Second World War, the Labour government won and embarked on a big series of nationalisation and increase in the welfare state. And the Tories who came afterwards effectively accepted that new settlement. And I wonder whether it's going to feel a bit like that.
There are some parallels. I mean, the first thing to be said is that clearly what's happened has undermined the idea that we can have a night watchman state, that we can have a minimal state. But it's also shown that no one really believed in that at all, that was really a bit of an Aunt Sally. We've been arguing about something that it turns out nobody really supports. And I know Heather said even Boris Johnson has taken the view on the state. I think Boris Johnson already had that view of the state. And in fact, a lot of the right had already moved to a much more pro-public spending position, partly because of its new electoral coalition after the general election. The difficulty, and Hannah was completely correct, is getting into this is not politically very difficult. Getting out of it is extremely difficult. And timing when you get out of it is extremely difficult and will have a lot of effects. I think that in the post-war era, the Attlee government understood correctly that there was an appetite for big social spending on certain things like healthcare, which had been sort of existing even before the war. But they also thought that the war had produced this kind of new spirit of cooperation in which people would put up with any degree of sacrifice for the common good. I think any politician who believes that that will last very long will find out, as Clement Attlee did find out, that that in fact isn't the case, that people are still people, that they still have their consumption and family and interests very much to the fore in their voting and economic behaviour, and governments have to cater to that.
Well, I wonder about that because we've really seen a rise in a sense of solidarity during this crisis, haven't we? You know, 750,000 British people have volunteered to help and loads more are helping their neighbours. So individualism actually feels a bit jarring at the moment. And I wonder if that's going to feed through into politics.
No, during a crisis, without any question, that feeling exists. And I'm very sympathetic to that feeling. I certainly don't think it disappears altogether. I'm somebody who believes very strongly in the kind of big society, unfashionable though that term is. So some of that will remain. It's just a belief that that kind of wartime spirit, I mean, that was precisely Attlee's belief. Look, here is our wartime spirit, our sense of purpose, our solidarity, and this will last for many years after the war. And John Bew's very good on this in his book Citizen Clem on Clement Attlee. It didn't last. It was naive of him to think that it would. So there's nothing wrong with believing, as I certainly do, in a strong community spirit. There's nothing wrong with being, as I certainly do, in a strong community spirit. There's nothing wrong with encouraging altruism, but it's also important not to be naive about what it is that people will need or expect in the post-infection or, in his case, post-war situation.
OK, Anne Applebaum, what do you think about the size of the state?
First of all, I'd like to pick up on something Paul Mason said about, countries with free markets and democracies not performing well. Actually, some Asian countries which have free markets and democracy are performing well. I think one of the interesting divisions that we're seeing around the world is not so much between authoritarian states and democracies as to who's doing well and who's doing badly, but places with effective civil service and effective bureaucracies and places that don't have them. There are going to be some authoritarian countries that are going to be disastrously and do disastrously badly. And some democracies, as I say, are already doing well in South Korea and Taiwan and elsewhere. And so it's important to look at what kind of state. It's not just the size, it's the type and the nature of it that I think is going to make the difference here. And it may be that we come in Western Europe and in the United States, we come to some deeper understandings of how to make our states better through this crisis. The second point I'd like to make is that everybody's trying something different. In every country that I have connections to, there's a different economic rescue package on the table. And I think it's important to have some humility about it. None of us really knows what works. I mean, how do you rescue a stalled economy? This isn't an ordinary financial crisis or an ordinary depression or recession where we have, experience from the past and predicted outcomes and so on. This is really something quite new. Of course, right now we all want state support and we want wages paid and so on. But it's important to remember that totally state-dominated and controlled economies in the past have not performed well. I mean, there's no historical evidence that says that, central planning and state domination produce, welfare and happiness for everybody. So, that can't be the answer at the end of this. Hopefully, along the way, we'll learn something about our states and about what works and what doesn't.
Paul Mason, what do you reckon?
Look, I don't think anybody's arguing in favour of a kind of Gosplan, Russian central planning type approach. But I think we have to understand that we're only at the beginning of the crisis this is going to cause. The first round effects are epidemiological. People are dying, people are off work, we're locked down. The second order effects could be quite unpredictable in the financial markets. Companies that were solvent and healthy could go under. Now, I'm happy to see, say, the British government or the US government mobilise fiscal and monetary stimulus. What is not happening is the mobilisation of resources centrally and some kind of step change in the way we encourage behavioural change. I was speaking to somebody in Finland who described their society as quote-unquote Hegelian, that is, with a sense of destiny. I think societies with a kind of, and nations with quite a strong sense of where they come from, who they are and where they're going, will get through this because they'll have less problem doing behavioural change and resource mobilisation. And it's societies where everyone's been told you're just an individual taking market choices are going to have a greater challenge in adapting to the level of radicalism that's temporarily needed.
I wonder also whether, because many more people are brushing up against the welfare state now, perhaps middle-class self-employed people who aren't going to be able to get enough compensation from the government, we might think after all this is over that the welfare state is actually too stingy and maybe should be more generous. I mean, it's certainly a lot more generous in Denmark.
First of all, I wasn't entirely